Alright, in this video I'm going to talk about a service weapon that doesn't really get much attention from the firearms community, and that is the Mark 27 pistol issued by SOCOM. Now there's a couple of different reasons why these don't get very much attention, one of those being that a lot of people don't even realize that SOCOM, or the military at all, or the US military rather, issues a Glock of any kind. And when it boils down to it, it is essentially just a Glock 19 with a few different factory options that differentiate it from any other commercial Glock 19. These are not significantly different from what you find on your gun store shelf. So in this video, I'm going to talk about what does make it different and how you can build your own clone of a Mark 27, and also what accessories you're going to want to use, and a little bit of the history of the Mark 27 program itself. I'm not going to delve too deep into that. If you want to know more about the adoption of the Mark 27, I'm going to link a couple of different videos down in the description. The first of which being from Jeffrey Gurwitch, who is a former Green Beret who was issued these pistols and was there for the inception of the Mark 27 program, which gives him a unique perspective on this pistol's adoption. And then also I'll link a video from Chris at Small Arms Solutions, who also has a very informative video. But essentially, as far as the history of this pistol goes, just because I know I'm going to get asked in the comments if I don't address it, the Glock 19 was chosen as the Mark 27 because SOCOM could not get the go-ahead from Big Army to adopt another full-size handgun such as the Glock 17, because they already had Beretta M9s in their inventory. So basically it boils down to bureaucratic nonsense. They were able to get the go-ahead to purchase a compact pistol. So thus the Glock 19 was chosen as the Mark 27. Now there are also three different iterations of the Mark 27. The first of which being a Mod 0, which is just a Glock 19 Gen 3 that may or may not have a threaded barrel and has factory Glock night sights. Later, they moved to the Mark 27 Mod 1, which was a Glock 19 Gen 3 with a threaded barrel and the MOS system, which is Glock's modular optic system. And then finally, they moved on to the Mark 27 Mod 2, which you see here, which is a Glock 19 Gen 4 MOS with a threaded barrel. So those are the three different versions of the Mark 27. This being the Mod 2 and then the Mod 0 are the easiest to build. The Mod 1 is actually fairly difficult to build because there were very, very few commercial Glock 19 Gen 3 MOSs that were ever released to the public. So, kudos to you if you can build one of those. If you do, send it to me on Instagram because I'd love to see it. But the majority of these clones of these pistols that you're going to see will either be the Mod 0 or the Mod 2, just for that reason. Starting with the threaded barrel, which I mentioned, all three versions of this gun have used a threaded barrel. And that is because at the same time these were being adopted, SOCOM started looking into issuing a 9mm suppressor for these. The barrel that they landed on just ended up being Glock's factory threaded barrel. And while mine is 1/2 by 28 threads, because that's more common here in America, and my suppressor uses 1/2 by 28 threads, the issued gun would have 13mm left-hand threads. So if you're going for something that's as clone correct as possible, you're going to want to find a 13mm threaded barrel, which is significantly harder to find than the 1/2 by 28 version in my experience. Also, if you want this to be as clone correct as possible, you're going to want to buy a version of the Glock 19 that comes with the factory threaded barrel. That way you have a matching serial number between your slide, barrel, and receiver. So just little details like that can make a difference between a typical clone and something that's more museum quality. In this case, I didn't go for that. I wanted something that was more functional and was pretty much clone correct, but it would have cost me a lot more time and money to track down a gun with a factory threaded barrel, so I just opted not to do that in this case. So something else that makes this gun not necessarily clone correct is the optic plate that I'm using. While the majority of issued pistols would utilize the factory Glock MOS plate, I opted to use the plate from Ford Control Designs, and I did that for a couple reasons. Many of you know already that the Glock MOS plates are not necessarily impressive. They tend to break and shear screws off. They don't fully support the optic body like this one does, and they also don't kind of extend out here on either side to fully support the optic from the bottom, and so those actually require the use of a sealing plate to seal the battery compartment off from whatever conditions you're shooting the gun in. So all that taken into account, I decided to go the less clone correct option and use this plate. But again, if you want a museum quality clone, you're going to want to use Glock's factory MOS plate. Now moving on to the sights. There are really only two different types of sights that I've seen used on these pistols. One being, and the most common being, the factory Glock night sights, which are standard height 3-dot sights. And then the other version being these Trijicon Bright and Tough suppressor sights. I opted to go with the suppressor sights because on top of using an RMR, which these sights can actually co-witness through quite nicely, they will actually see over and clear a suppressor if you are running a suppressor. But yeah, those are the two options that I see. Of course, end users that get issued these pistols are likely to swap out things on them, so you may end up seeing other sights issued on these as well, but those are the two that I've noticed. We'll talk really briefly about what optics are issued on these. On the Mod 0, of course, there would be no optic because there's no MOS cut. The Mod 1 is commonly seen with the Doctor sight, while the Mod 2 was developed around the same time as SOCOM gave a couple of different contracts to different optic companies for miniature red dot pistols. So the first contract was for the Trijicon RM06 HRS, which is the model you see here. And the only thing that makes this really different than other RM06s is that it has the coyote colored anodizing and it has a QR code on top. Also, the actual issued optic would not have the Bible verse engraved right here like Trijicon does in all their commercial optics, but they both would have the manufacturer date engraved, which other Trijicon optics do not. And then the issued version would have an NSN number engraved on top here. So, but other than that, these are a pretty spot-on representation of what SOCOM is getting issued. The other optic that was contracted was the Leupold Delta Point Pro, which also you would attach via the MOS system. The problem with that optic is, for one, it's not as tough as the RMR, but these suppressor sights are not tall enough to actually co-witness with that, meaning that a lot of operators would actually just end up with the shorter Glock night sights in conjunction with the Delta Point, because they can't co-witness anyway, so why bother swapping them out? But yeah, those are the two issued optics. And there's some pluses to the Delta Point Pro. You don't have to remove the optic to change the battery out. It has a shake awake feature. In my experience, it has cleaner glass. But many of these that are issued are being run with the RMRs because there are definitely some pluses to these as well. Mainly being that they're smaller, they're tougher, and they can co-witness with regular suppressor sights. So moving on, the last couple pieces that make this different from a standard commercial Glock 19. The slide release is a Glock factory extended slide release. So these make it easier to release the slide and manipulate the slide release when using gloves or under adverse conditions. This is the same slide release that would come on a gun like a Glock 34, which is more of a competition model, so they include those from the factory, but they do not typically include them on Glock 19s. So the last piece is actually inside the striker assembly, which obviously you can't see right now, but I'll clip in some photos of it. These guns would be issued with Glock factory marine, also known as maritime, spring cups. And the purpose of those spring cups is to allow the gun to be fired underwater or just when the striker channel is filled with water. So it's more of an adverse condition upgrade that for 99% of people will never matter, but for cloners, it's a super cheap and easy thing to install. I did install it on mine. So as far as the actual components of the pistol itself, that really is the only significant difference. Now, lastly, I'll talk a little bit about accessories that are issued with these. I already covered the optics, so the flashlights, you'll see different Surefire lights from X200s on the older Mark 27s to the new X300s, X300Us, X300Vs, and also the new Surefire XVL2s, which incorporate an IR laser and illuminator. So, like with anything else, if the operator can take it off with a screwdriver, they're probably going to. So these have been seen with quite a few different options. I'll talk about magazines really quickly before I get into suppressors. Of course, these are going to be issued with your standard 15-round Glock 19 magazines. Also, end users would put Glock 17 magazines into these, or even the longer 33-round Glock stick mags. So you would see quite a few different magazine configurations on these. Terran tactical extensions have also been seen, as well as some others. So finally, let's get into suppressors. Recently, SOCOM decided to finally end their 9mm suppressor contract solicitation, and they selected a winner. What it came down to was a few different competitors, which I believe were the Silencer Co. Omega 9K, which I have here, the Surefire Rider 9mm, and then also the Sig Sauer Mod X9 suppressor. And ultimately, the Sig Sauer was awarded the contract. There's a lot of cool things going on with the Sig Mod X9. It's a modular suppressor that lets you run anywhere from 1 to 7 baffles, so it can be shortened from a little tiny suppressor that doesn't have as much suppression capability all the way to a full-length 9mm suppressor. So it's also constructed of titanium, whereas like this Omega 9K is steel and quite a bit heavier. And if you know anything about recent military contract solicitations, Sig Sauer has been doing very, very well in that department. So it's really no surprise that they won. But there actually is a photo floating around of one of the test guns for that suppressor contract that utilized an Omega 9K. So I did buy a piston so that I could mount my Omega 9K to my Glock, though I will probably pick up the SIG suppressor at some point. So anyway, if you have any questions about this platform or anything like that, you can either ask me in the comments down below or check out those videos that I mentioned earlier, because those are a much more in-depth review of the actual process of obtaining these pistols and where the idea and kind of the need for these came from within SOCOM. So also be sure to check me out on Instagram. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.